Hello everyone, it's Friday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Recently, Danuri, the Korean lunar orbiter, sent back photos of the moon's far side, the first time a Korean spacecraft has done so. South Koreans are hoping to hear news of further success in space-related missions soon, as the country's domestically developed rocket, Nuri, is getting ready for its third launch this coming May. This third liftoff follows the first launch in 2021 and the second one last June, but it's much more meaningful as Nuri is to carry an actual satellite, unlike the first two test launches. What would be the significance if Nuri's third liftoff is done successfully? And to open up more possibilities and a new chapter in space, what more should be done? Marking Science Day in South Korea, today for an in-depth analysis, we welcome Kang Sung-ju, Research Officer at Gwacheon National Science Museum. Dr. Kang, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
And we also have Wendy Ann Whitman-Cope, Associate Professor at the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies. Dr. Whitman-Cope, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, first question to our Dr. Kang. The third launch of South Korea's domestically developed Nuri rocket is coming up next month. Now, unlike the first two test launches, I believe this one is much more meaningful as it really going to carry satellites. Could you give us more details on this?
The two previous launches of Nuri have been very successful. The first one, while not placing the dummy satellite at the target altitude, was important in identifying critical issues that would not have been identified without a launch. And the second one, which placed the performance verification satellite into its target orbit. The third launch will be happening on May 24th. Is very meaningful since, unlike the prior two launches, we can call the third launch will be the first true practical launch. Even though the overall weight was reduced in the third launch, all 8 satellites are heading to space for the first time with practical purpose on board. And the significance of this launch is not just to put the satellites in the target orbit, but if all the practical satellites work really well, Korea's entire process from the satellite production to entering the space orbit has been accomplished with the Korean technology. As a result, if we lead the entire process from launch to production with our own technology, the market for assisting various other Asian countries or other countries in the future by further developing this technology may be stated to be different.
Right, I see. So this third one is very meaningful and important in that it is a practical launch. Now, Dr. Whitman-Cope, Nuri will carry a total of 8 satellites, and I hear the main satellite is a second next-generation small-sized one. And the reason for the scheduled launch time of 6:24 p.m. is related to that particular satellite. What is so special about this satellite, and what can it do?
I mean, this is really kind of something that happens with most satellites. You want to put it in a particular orbit at a particular altitude, which drives what time you want to launch the rocket. For this satellite in particular, it's really an interesting piece of technology. It's a small size satellite, so it's not a large one that has typically been manufactured. It's been able to take advantage of commercial, more readily available off-the-shelf technology and technology that has been miniaturized to allow for that smaller size satellite. But it'll still pack a big punch. One of the major missions with the next generation small satellite is what's called synthetic aperture radar, or SAR. And this allows the satellite to do Earth remote sensing through clouds, no matter the time of day or night. So that obviously is really helpful. And that's really probably the big mission that's driving the particular time. If you want to image a particular region of Earth over time and allow that satellite enough time to stay over that region, you need to launch it at a particular time in a particular direction to get it where you want to go. I think the other thing that's also really interesting about this satellite is it was relatively low cost. It only cost a little over 18 million US dollars to make. And while that does sound like a lot, and it is, that's actually relatively low cost for most satellites today. So I think it's a really good demonstration of the types of technology and experience that the South Korean satellite industry itself has been able to accomplish over the past couple of years.
Right, I see. Very interesting indeed. Dr. Kang, on board will be 4 satellites developed by the Korea Astronomy and Space Science Institute and 3 more made by private companies. Could you tell us more about them as well?
Sure. In addition to second next generation satellite described earlier by Professor Koh, there will be 7 more small spacecraft will be on board. 4 of them are known as a SNIPE, in Korean Doyoset, and the other 3 are developed by the private corporations. To begin, SNIPE is 4 CubeSat constructed by the Korean Astronomy and Space Science Institute. Its primary mission is to monitor the space environment and the weather. It will be the first time in history that 4 CubeSats fly in a clustering, which is extremely tough to achieve. If it is successful, it will substantially contribute to the research of space weather secrets, such as space radiation, while examining the Earth's ionosphere. And it will be a technologically demonstration in the form of the world's first cluster flight of cube satellites. Lumire's satellites are also designed to collect the data. The satellite data businesses, which employs a satellite to gather, analyze, and use images, is currently growing more popular and marketable, with the key being how thorough and accurate data can be acquired. To establish the composition of the item being examined, the hyperspectral camera that Lumire is developed will send up on the satellite will look not just the visible light, but also the ultraviolet range, which is not visible to humans. Furthermore, the JUSTEC satellite will test the motors that control the satellite's attitude and position to see if they can be used to control the attitude of the next generation satellite or space telescope. And the Space satellite will test the ability of a satellite that has completed its mission to reduce space debris. They have, in my opinion, they have very practical and significant missions in terms of providing us with the strategies to research on space and handle space debris that we will need to consider in the future.
Right, I see. Very impressive. Now, Dr. Whitman-Kobe, if this third liftoff is successful, how significant would it be for South Korea in terms of becoming a country that can develop a space launch vehicle?
We say it all the time, but we say it because it's true. Space is hard, and getting there is even harder. It's probably the most technically and the most costly part of getting to and operating in space. And it's something that has historically been reserved for the countries that have the most advanced economies and scientific and engineering sectors. And so the fact that a country like South Korea or any country can do that, it is really significant. This has changed somewhat as commercial companies have been able to get in the game. But the fact that a country would be able to own their own means of getting to space, I think, is really the big part here. By having your own means of space launch, you're able to get to space without having to depend on another country or even a company. And so here in the United States, we refer to that as an assured launch service. And so you really want to make sure, if you're seeing space as an important part of your future, whether it's for national security purposes, scientific purposes, or commercial economic purposes, you really want to have that means that you're not depending on anybody else. So having that third launch really gives, I think, South Korea a sense of accomplishment and experience in space launch. Every space launch is different. Every time you launch a rocket, something new is going to pop up. So the more experience that you can really get under your belt in doing that and knowing what could go wrong and how to fix it, I think is really significant. So I think this just continues on the trajectory that South Korea has been on in really establishing themselves as a member of the International Space Club.
All right, I see. I'm feeling quite a pride here. Okay, let's tap on the progress made on exploration of the moon here. Dr. Kang, just around a week ago, South Korea was very much excited to see Danuri, South Korea's first lunar orbiter, succeed in capturing photos of the dark side of the moon. How significant was that?
Images of the moon's dark side were released on the 12th by the Korean lunar explorer Danuri. Although photographs of the moon's dark side had previously been captured by many other countries before, this is the first time Korea has captured an image of the moon's dark side. The photographs were captured using the LUTI, a high-resolution camera that is one of the several instruments on Danuri. During its 1,000 orbits around the moon, Danuri has already captured and transmitted these kinds of the photographs. The images released this time are more clear and more detailed than previously published images on craters on the lunar surface and mountains within craters, and will be used in the future in conjunction with other instruments such as POCAM to better understand the composition of the lunar surface and the formation process of the peaks within craters. We also transmitted data using a wide field polarimeter, which uses light reflection to determine particle size and composition on the lunar surface. The brightness of the surface varies depending on the polarization, exposing its features and composition, and other countries are intrigued because Danuri was the first time to observe lunar polarization with a POCAM developed by the Korean Astronomy and Space Science Institute.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Whitman-Kopp, delving a bit deeper here, Danuri captured high-resolution images of regions on the dark side or far side of the moon, such as the Sokovsky crater, the Valley-Schrödinger Valley, and the Charlotte crater. It's even hard to pronounce. Could you please explain to us what new knowledge we can obtain from these photos?
You know, it's really hard to believe, but we know very little about the moon and how it came to be and its sort of development. There's a lot of scientific theories out there, but we really only ever get to see half the picture, given that the moon is tidally locked. So we here on Earth only ever see the one side, the near side of the moon. So getting these pictures and getting this really intriguing and interesting data on the far side of the moon will enable scientists to get a better picture of what the moon looks like today and even how it came to be. This will also be really important in the coming years as we start to do more exploration of the moon. One of the things that the United States and its partners in the Artemis missions are really interested are the types of resources that might be available on the moon. We know that there is some water ice available, perhaps close to the surface, but there might be other potentially valuable resources as well. One example is a form of hydrogen that might be really important and useful if we ever get to the point where we can understand and do cold nuclear fusion. And so really getting to know the moon, how it came to be, and the types of resources that might be available will be key for extending humanity's ability to explore the moon and potentially exploit several of the resources that might be there. So these types of pictures, this type of data, really enables us to get a better, fuller picture of the moon. And it's really technologically difficult to do. One of the things that has made this a rarity in the space world is that you need to have, it makes it very difficult to relay the signals from satellites that are orbiters that are behind the moon. So the fact that this is an orbiter and it can come closer to the Earth and transmit signals when it is in sight of Earth is really one of the key enablers of this new information.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Whitman-Kopp, one more question here. Staying on the lunar front, Luxembourg's European Space Resources Innovation Center and South Korea's Korea Institute of Geoscience and Mineral Resources signed an MOU on Thursday to jointly investigate resources on the moon. Could you give us more details on this and what kind of joint research project could we expect?
A lot of this has to do with the resources that are available. It's one thing to know what might be on the moon, it's another to know how to use it. And as we get to doing more exploration on planetary bodies such as the moon, this is going to be really important to trying to figure out how to exploit the resources that are there. There's a lot of challenges to this, one being that the Outer Space Treaty says that nobody, no country can own any planetary body, including the moon. But countries like Luxembourg and the United States have argued essentially and recognized in national law that people might be able to use the resources that are available, if not, if even if they don't necessarily own them. So that's one of the key reasons a lot of this happens in countries like Luxembourg that have laws that are favorable to the exploitation of planetary resources. So under this MOU, we can really expect some enhanced cooperation in terms of developing technology that might be able to exploit those resources in the future. This also, is a big part of the Artemis program here in the United States. South Korea has signed on to the Artemis Accords, which is an understanding of how countries might operate on the moon, the lunar surface in the future. And so this is another way in which South Korea can participate and contribute to a really exciting project and enable humanity to really better understand and explore our solar system.
Right, exciting indeed. Oh, now, Dr. Kang, shifting gears back to space from the moon, this morning we heard that SpaceX's Starship had taken off but exploded midair before stage separation. Despite the explosion, many say the launch met several of the company's objectives. Could you briefly tell us about the Starship? And also, is a Korean version of the Starship likely one day? And for that dream to come true, what kind of assistance would companies in the private sector need?
While SpaceX's Starship failed to launch this morning, what I was very impressed is that many people celebrated the launch despite of the mishap. This mission was difficult even for SpaceX, one of the most advanced private space enterprise. The Starship was a space launch vehicle created with the lofty objective of populating Mars in mind. Its engines or dimensions were larger than those of any previous space launch vehicle. Even with common sense, it's easy to understand how difficult it would be to launch a vehicle more than 10 stories of the building into space. Government-led launch vehicle research is still in very early stages, as well as private sectors in Korea. And it appears evident that we should aim for something similar to our Starship. However, the technology is just now being passed from the government to the commercial sector, and the private space economy is still in its very infancy stages. It is still highly immature, both financially and technologically, but in order for this space industry to be competitive, the private sectors, not government, must drive it. The private sector's involvement is critical not only for technology but also cutting the cost of the launch. Korea also plans to launch a spacecraft to Mars by 2045. Meanwhile, it is critical for our private sectors to gain expertise through collaboration with other advanced countries in the space industry, including not only Korea, but also the United States and Europe. As a result, I'm cautiously optimistic that the day will come when many private enterprises will be able to develop such a massive space launch vehicle in Korea if they have a lot of experience, not just in Korea, but also with other countries.
Right, I will have my fingers crossed as well. Now, since we are running out of time, Dr. Kang, I believe this could be our last question. But during his visit to Washington, President Yoon Suk-yeol is actually expected to visit NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center to discuss collaboration in space technology. What kind of cooperation could we expect between Seoul and Washington?
Chirag Parikh of Executive Secretary of the National Space Council in the White House traveled to South Korea ahead of President Yoon's visit to the U.S. to meet with the key officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of the Science and ICT in Korea. The visit follows President Yoon's meeting with the President Joe Biden at the United States-South Korea Summit in May of last year. During the summit, the two leaders expressed their determination to strengthen bilateral collaboration in the space exploration, space technology, and the space industry. This time, we expect to discuss ways to broaden cooperation and scope in the Artemis program, a lunar exploration project led by the United States and involving South Korea as well. And in addition to this, request countries cooperation between the two countries of the Korean Lunar Landers project, which is scheduled to launch in 2031. We also intend to discuss U.S. fundings for the Korean satellite navigation system, such as Korean version of the GPS, KPS. So we expect extremely positive result in this visit, I believe.
Of course. I'd like to ask more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. But thank you, Dr. Kang, and thank you, Dr. Whitman-Koop, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be next Monday with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the weekend, and goodbye.